And so as soon as I said, yes, I'll feel like a failure, I recognized in that moment that God was transforming my fundamental expectation of what it meant to minister, which was not to garner more people, but to steward the ones that were right before me.
Well, you want to have a great conversation today?
Yes.
Are you up for a great conversation, Abe?
That's easy. That's easy with you, Jeff. Let's do it.
This is Abe Figueroa. He now works full-time for Charis Counseling, and that's a new assignment for him. But I want to spend a little bit of time, Abe, talking about how we got here, how you got here, because you've had an interesting journey. And whatever's happened along the way has produced what's in you right now. So talk a little bit about your journey.
Yeah. So to frame it up, I work for a Christian counseling center that's a nonprofit. It's called Charis Counseling.
Yeah.
And at Charis, what we specialize in is making sure that someone who runs out of money and is going to quit counseling halfway through because they just ran out of money doesn't have to. And I find donors, and we have a bunch of donors who come alongside someone who's about to quit and make sure that they finish their healing journey. That's our number one thing. And our number two is we give away professional premium education to churches, staff, schools, organizations that want to know more about mental health training, but don't even know where to start and don't know who to trust. And so that's where I come in, is that I get to work with counselors and work with pastors and bring these two worlds together. So, yeah.
So what makes you qualified to do this, Abe?
Qualified's a loaded term, right? Where did I come from? How did I get there?
Yeah.
So I am a Southeast Portland kid. I grew up right around Mount Tabor area in Portland.
Yeah.
And, if you cut my arm today, salmon and pine trees would just start flowing out of me like that.
How about skateboards?
And skateboards, yes. I went to skate church.
Yeah.
I grew up in the church. Grew up in a little local church. It's now called Trinity Church. It's on 30th and Sandy. It used to be called Emmanuel Christian Fellowship. It was actually called Emmanuel Christian Tabernacle, and then they kept calling for a rabbi, so we changed the name a little. And just a small local church in a local neighborhood. And I was just a Portland kid. Mm-hmm. Went to Multnomah Bible College and had a real encounter with Jesus that became a pivotal moment for me when I was actually living in a shack on the edge of the jungle in Papua New Guinea. Well, actually Papua, Indonesia.
Like you do.
Yeah, And so I was in this shack. It was a really interesting study abroad program that Multnomah actually introduced me to. So I spent a semester there, had incredible encounters with Jesus where my experience with Jesus went from, yes, I'm a Christian, to I know my friend named Jesus.
Very cool.
It's not fascinating in the sense of intellectual. It is viscerally the pivotal moment in my life.
Yeah.
So from there, I wrap up at Multnomah. I go get my master's in education, decide to be an English teacher, and I was on my lunch break.
Wow.
And I got a phone call on my lunch break from our national director of churches. I was part of this denomination, and the national director was kind of checking out all of the national churches and came by and met my wife and I, and we were just helping out with the church. I had a 2-year-old just starting my career as a teacher, and at lunchtime I see this Indiana phone area code, and I pick it up, and there's this deep Texas drawl on the other side asking me if I want to take a church in Ohio. And I said, no. I don't want to take a church. Of course. What are you talking about? I have a 2-year-old. I'm starting my career. I have never asked to be a pastor. No. And they're like, we really think you should pray about it. They're like, we're not going to force you into anything. Talk to your wife. I've got 2 bosses, Jesus and my wife. And so talk to the bosses and see what happens. So I tell my wife, and her response is, "I'm sure they could find someone better." Like, no offense, but like, there's got to be someone better, you know. And so, but we keep praying about it, and the more that we pray about it, the more we feel like Jesus is saying yes. And so we pack up our life. We were 25 years old, 2-year-old in tow. Fly to Ohio, and join. And end up being the lead pastors of a small, like 50-person church.
Yeah.
I affectionately call it the country church in the hood, little country church in the hood. A beautiful group of people in Mansfield, Ohio. And so we spend the next 10 years of our life there just sharing life. A lot of what we did was inviting the youth into our home.
Yeah.
So they can see what a Christian family looks like. A lot of them were coming from homes that were affected by drug addiction and infidelity and, you know, single parenting. And so like pretty much early on, we realized whatever it means to do Christian ministry, it means something more than just giving good ideas about Jesus and having some answers from the Bible. It meant a life integrated in the way of Jesus.
Yeah.
And most of that is seen, not told.
Well, that was what I was thinking when you were describing this. Is what did you learn about yourself during that time? This is your first spin at full-time ministry. What did you learn about yourself and who you are?
Oh man, what a question! That's so good. I learned a lot. There was this moment, we had 2 services. So we were super old school. There's only 50 of us, but we had 2 services on Sunday, and they were 2 separate sermons. And everyone who was at the morning service had lunch and came back for the evening service.
Oh, that is weird.
That's old school, you know. If you're familiar, if like any of your listeners are familiar with like kind of like old school Pentecostal tradition, like that, then they're smiling right now. They're like, yes, the glory days. And so so that's how we were doing church. So we finished the morning service. I think my wife had taken the kids home, and I was driving home alone. And as I was driving home, I felt the Spirit just drop a question out of the blue into my heart, which was, if this 50-person church, Abe, never grew, if it was 50 people for the entire span of your ministry here, would you feel like a failure? And I thought about it and was like, well, yeah. Yeah, I think I would. And as soon as I said it, it's, like as you say something and realize the implications all at the same moment. What occurred to me in that moment was that's the wrong metric for measuring success. Mm-hmm. And the best way to describe it is like, if God had asked me a different question and said, you have 2 kids now, Abe. If you only have 2 kids for the rest of your life, will you feel like a failure? What would I say? Would I say, oh, yes. I mean, if I don't have at least 12 kids, like, what was I even doing? Like, I certainly didn't answer the call to be a good father. Of course not. Because if I steward 2 kids to love the Lord, to love their neighbor, and that they want to come back for Christmas when they're adults, that's a win. And so as soon as I said, yes, I'll feel like a failure, I recognized in that moment that God was transforming my fundamental expectation of what it meant to minister, which was not to garner more people, but to steward the ones that were right before me.
Do you realize that that's the same question that every pastor asks themselves and tells no one?
No!
They don't tell anybody about it, but every pastor wrestles with success. And yet there's no one really to talk to. The last person they'll talk to is another pastor. So one of the things I've found over the years is that's one of the unanswered questions that lingers in pastors' minds and hearts is what success is.
Yeah. To me, at least, and I'm convinced that different ministers are called to different forms of success.
Yeah.
Like God has distinct calls. it wouldn't be right for every Israelite to look at David killing Goliath and be like, well, that seems successful. I'll go find me a Goliath and then kill him. And then clearly I'm a faithful Israelite.
Yeah, because then you have to go the Bathsheba route too, and that's not going to make you more popular.
Yeah. So with that as a caveat,
Yeah.
I know for me what success meant was living into a faithful practice of communion with Jesus and neighbor that was sustainable for a lifetime, and that had the ripple effect of well-being throughout the sphere of influence that a person had. And that is very distinct from having one more person come through the door. It was, are the 50 people that are sitting already here, having already walked through this door, do they have a broadening sense for their call to live peacefully and faithfully in the world?
Yeah.
And oftentimes what I find is the answer is no. There are so many things that are vying for our attention, that are vying for our distractibility. And there are so many forms of success, forms of even living the Christian life, that sometimes it feels like we have so much information, but we don't know how to integrate that into a peaceful and faithful life.
Right. Very cool. I love the fact that that's the first thing that came out of your mouth as far as what you learned, because that's one of the most difficult things, I think, to wrestle through as a pastor, as a leader of a church. So you were there 10 years. How did that wind up, and how did you make the next move?
Yeah, so over the course of that time, I started becoming a speaker that was asked for. And so I would travel places, and the national headquarters would help me get to different places, Iceland and Guatemala, and throughout America. And it was really, really just a wonderful season. Meanwhile, as I'm going through, I'm starting to notice that I'm having some questions about how the headquarters are running things. And not to reduce it too quickly, but essentially I started to get kind of like Seattle Mars Hill vibes. Started to ask some questions, and that ended up in the international board basically asking me, "Hey, what?" is your pulpit, they asked, an extension of our founder's pulpit? And I was like, well, that's a weird question. I'm not.
Yeah.
That's a metaphor. I don't know exactly what it means, but here's what I can say. And I picked up the Bible and I said, I believe that this book tells us how to love God, how to love neighbor, how to live into this world faithfully. And then I put my fist underneath the Bible and I said, our founder and other people who helped me understand the scriptures,
right?
They help me understand it. And then I live that personally. And then it becomes fruit in my life. And the fruit that comes from my life is what I preach and disciple people into.
It sounds like what they were asking you is you're still part of the team.
Yeah, they were asking a question about loyalty.
Yeah.
And I answered differently. And at that moment, they said, well, then you don't qualify to be a pastor here. And in 8 days,
Wonderful.
took the keys from the church.
No.
8 days. 8 days, it was done. And
that's crazy.
It is crazy. It is wonderful. And it is the worst thing that happened to our family. All in one moment. If those are the terms for qualifying or not qualifying, then you're right. That's good. I'm glad we figured that out together.
Yeah.
And so that's how it ended. It ended in a moment. And about a year later, we ended up coming back to Portland, Oregon, really feeling like this is where God has our personal and family growth for our next season. The next season is definitely back here in Portland. Mm-hmm. And so about 2 years ago, we came back.
Yeah, yeah. And you started teaching again?
Yeah, so picked up teaching. Was teaching at an online school called Valor Global Online. Great online school. English teacher, 11th and 12th grade. And then on my lunch break, I get another call.
What is it with the lunch? I want to eat lunch where you eat lunch.
Right?
Apparently, there's some kind of a conduit there from God.
Yeah. Like I guess like maybe I'm really obtuse, and he has to literally call me into ministry like over and over to give me like the sign. But either way, I get another call on my lunch break, and my buddy Luke calls me and says, "Hey, I know this Christian counseling center that wants to start a wing of their organization where they help assist churches, help break down the stigma around mental health. And they're looking for somebody who has the ability to write curriculum, work with counselors to like kind of glean all of their wisdom and turn it into something that could work for middle school, high school, like full congregations. And who can bridge the gap for pastors who are not quite sure or have like important questions about mental health."
You mean the 90% of pastors?
Yeah. And
sorry, guys. Don't want to step on anybody's toes, but it hasn't been a very popular thing.
And I have a lot of empathy for that, even personally. Simple words like, for example, empathy can be weaponized against a pastor to actually presume that a pastor has to believe and affirm everything that someone feels. Which is actually not the right definition of empathy. And so, struggling with that personally, having lots of conversations with lots of different pastors in the community in Ohio, and then in our church networks, I thought, so I would write curriculum, connect with pastors, and help bridge the gap between mental health and spiritual practice in a way that helps build each other up instead of pitting one over against the other, which is oftentimes why we feel defensive.
Right.
Sign me up.
Yeah.
And so here we are.
Well, not only that, but you have. I mean, one of the most observed part of ministry is the trauma that pastors experience. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's quite a bit that's talked about and written about as far as trauma that the congregation receives from some pastoral leaders, but that goes both ways.
Oh, yeah.
And nobody ever talks about it.
Yeah.
And where's a pastor supposed to go to talk about trauma? And yet, you experienced it. That's how things ended in a traumatic experience in Indiana. I mean, like,
absolutely.
Hello.
Absolutely.
You're coming with not just the ability to write and communicate, but also the ability to connect with the trauma that a lot of people in ministry go through. So you're great. You're a great person for that, obviously.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah, and I think the thing about the particular pains that we go through as pastors, like there's the big trauma, big T trauma moments.
Yeah.
But then there's all of the little ones. And even experiencing with someone what they're going through as they're talking to you.
Right.
You don't sit in your office pastoral counseling with a woman who's receiving who just found out that 30 years of marriage has been marked by infidelity she didn't know anything about, and keep your heart rate the same.
Yeah.
Not unless you're pathological. We're designed at the neurological level to mirror each other.
Right.
And so there is an amount of that lived experience in the flock that one is also living as well. And oftentimes, I was just talking to a pastor buddy of mine here in Portland, and he said that once he did this kind of questionnaire about stress. And it had some type of, I wish I knew the details, but it had some type of like range of like, this is about how much stress in translated into numbers that you should kind of have per month and per year before you should expect yourself to kind of be breaking down.
Uh-oh.
And he goes, oh no, I hit my max in the first month of the year.
Uh-oh.
And I think, you're laughing, I'm laughing, the people listening right now are probably laughing as well that are pastors, because it's like, oh yeah, in a moment.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as doing a funeral.
Well, that was what I was just thinking.
Were you really? Okay,
My
tell me
first
about that.
funeral was traumatic. I mean, they took me, I show up at the funeral home. I'm ready to do the funeral. They take me into a little room with a tiny little desk and a chair, and they said, you can spend some time here, and we'll come back and get you when we're ready. And I'm sitting in the room thinking, what am I supposed to do in here? What is this? Is this like punishment? Am I a newbie? And so they don't want to tell me what to do. They're just going to stick me in a closet until the service is ready to start. I was so confused. And no one ever told me that that's a place to be contemplative and meditate a little bit and maybe pray a little bit before the service. I thought I was being punished. I come out of my little room and
Go
I'm
to
like,
your room, pastor.
yeah. It was traumatic because I didn't know.
Whoa, yes. That kind of stuff. Like there's the individual, and I think what you point out there is the humanity of pastoring.
Yeah.
For example, a funeral is a moment where a number of strangers, along with many key players in your church, are looking for you to make order out of the chaos of the effects of sin in the world. Death is the
I'm
effect.
glad nobody told me that ahead of time.
That's what they told you just before they closed the door in the closet, right? But that's actually what's happening in that moment, is that they're looking for one person to be a conductor of songs, of testimonies, of music, of this gathering to make sense in order out of the effects of sin in the world.
Yeah. That's great.
And whether someone can say that out loud or not, we are intuiting the gravity of that moment. And we've all been to bad funerals. And bad funerals are extra bad because we're all, even as pastors, we're looking for that pastor to make order out of the effects of sin in the world, which is a tall order already. That has a cumulative effect on us, especially if we feel like the fact that seems scary to be in that closet or to stand up there and hope that you don't screw it all up and make people mad is something that is a sign of your inability to be a good pastor or a sign of weakness or a sign of failure already, then we hide those things and they begin to ferment, as opposed to recognizing in a group of peers or with a trusted friend or with a counselor that human responses to very difficult moments are the most healthy response you can have.
Yeah.
You should feel weird when you're locked into a closet and you have the weight of ordering, like cosmically ordering this person's life in the next 30 minutes with your words.
That's a pretty tall order.
That's a huge order.
So you add up like 25 or 30 of those
in January
perspectives. And there's really not many places for pastors to turn to.
That's right.
I mean, it's not a conversation you'll have with your best friend. It's not a conversation you'll have with your board of elders. You should have that conversation with another pastor, but that just doesn't happen enough because pastors' friendships typically aren't with other pastors. Everybody doesn't have time. Nobody has time for that. We should, because it's really a huge benefit to us to be able to sit down with another pastor and work through some of this stuff, but we don't.
Yeah.
So so I know there's a void between ministry and mental health. Mm-hmm. And some of it's generational. My generation sucked at it. Mm-hmm. And the generations after mine have got better and better at it, to now where Gen Z is probably expecting mental health to be part of their benefit package as a pastor in a church.
Right.
Which is a long ways from where I started. So it seems like Charis brought you on, Abe, to create a bridge between mental health and the church. How does that work?
It's a great question. We'll touch on a couple of things. First, I think that we're at a moment where we need to reassess whether we have the right kind of ecclesial structures in our local church. If in that church, the elder board cannot bear a pastor's humanity.
Whoa.
In other words, if I can't talk to my elder board because they expect me to be a kind of human who doesn't need to process his feelings of the, like you said, 25 to 30 of those kinds of events over the course of a year that are starting to wear me out. If they say, we hired you to be able to handle that, then we've created a structure.
Well, even the way you said that, it's like, why do we think anybody should be able to handle that?
Right. And oftentimes we punt to underdeveloped associations with God's call.
Yeah.
That God's call or God's anointing means that one is able to do whatever God calls them to do without any negative effects on their life. If God called me to do this, why would I suffer and even feel like I'm failing at it if God called me? Didn't he empower me? Doesn't he have the cattle on 1,000 hills?
We've all heard those quotes.
Yes, exactly. Whether they're said explicitly or implicitly. And that's just in our internal self. That's not even talking about the structures that we unconsciously create to underwrite that association or assumption in our church leadership context. I remember once she ended up being a person on our board in Ohio. She came up to me and she said, "Pastor, I was praying, and I had a revelation about you." And I'm like, "Uh-oh." Your eyebrows went up.
I had a dream last night.
About you. And I was like, "Okay, tell me about that." And she said, "I don't want to be offensive here, and like I hope you don't take it the wrong way." And now my palms are sweating.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay,
I just
lay it on me." She said, I was praying about you and for you, and it occurred to me, you are just a normal guy trying to be faithful to Jesus like the rest of us. And I looked at him and I said, except that God personally came down out of heaven to tell you that like you are fully mature bride of Christ and welcome, like I'm like you and Elijah, we're getting the chariot, we're just going right now. That's the best thing I possibly could have heard from you.
Yeah, for sure.
Because there was a longing in my heart as a pastor to not be known, to not be known as some type of spiritual superhero that's got all the answers and has somehow figured out how to live the life of faith without getting hurt or worn out. But rather that the vulnerability of my humanity is the way in which I respond to the gospel faithfully.
Right.
And that's going to require me to be not the Reverend Figueroa, but Abe Figueroa, who helps us and who needs help.
Yeah.
So my first answer, like the first part to answering your question would be to say, and to say to a pastor, if your church is the kind of place right now where it feels like you can't be a human, it's time to find at least one trusted person in that church to say, how do we start creating a more healthy church structure that allows me to be a person and not just a professional? That would be number one. Number two, a buddy of mine wanted to help take care of his pastors. He knew pastoral ministry. He knows how hard it can be. And he's like, I want to take him out to coffee and, just say like, Pastor, we'll just call him Don. Pastor Don, like, I'm here for you. Now, you and I have both been pastors.
Right.
If someone took us out and said, I'm here for you, how is your life really going? No, really. At least for me, I'm still in pastor mode. I'm here to take care of Pete, not Pete to take care of me.
Right.
And I don't know how much I could give of myself to Pete before he's like, oh no, like, you're a human. I don't know, like, I'm here to serve him. And so I told my friend, like, look, I think you should do that. I think you should take your pastor out. I think you should let him know that you see him as a normal person. I think that's exactly what we need. And he also needs someone outside of his sphere of influence that he's paid and hired to care for him. That's where what you do here at City Serve is such a big deal, because you're creating spaces for pastors to have that kind of community with the people who understand pastoring the best, other pastors.
Right.
And there's also things that all of us pastors know we can't do, which is how do you untangle the web of personal ambition, personal past wounds, fears that are driving us unconsciously. That's where we need a therapist. And that's where finding a trusted mental health professional who can help us sort these kinds of things out is also really important. You and I have both seen people who feel like they're called to the ministry, but who are actually saying underneath that, I want the ministry to heal me.
Right. Or fulfill me.
Or fulfill me. And some of us, by the grace of God, have a moment where we realize, I think I came into this thing to like extract some type of meaning,
right,
or fulfillment, or even healing out of being a professional Christian that is exploitative of the ministry. What do I do? I'm the pastor now.
So it seems, I don't know if this is true. I mean, you would know more about this than I would, Abe, but it seems like sometimes I feel like pastors are so different, wired different, way different expectations, not just of themselves, but expectations other people put on them. It seems kind of like the expectations that a doctor would have to deal with, where you feel like you can really make a difference in people's lives most of the time. But there are some people you're just not going to fix.
Right.
People die. And how do you reconcile that? How do you deal with that? How do you work through that loss? And I think pastors sometimes feel the same way. There's people that seem to get into the church structure and thrive. And there's some people that get into the church structure and it's actually harmful for them. And there's a loss because of that. And so I think it just seems to me that therapy for those two professions would be somewhat similar.
Yeah. Tell me where you see the similarity. I'm interested in that.
Because there's great successes and great losses in the same package.
Yeah.
You know, and so you like the thing that works to draw one person into a relationship with God seems to actually cause another person to move away from God.
Yes.
And you're the same person.
Yeah.
I haven't changed. My message hasn't changed, but how do I reconcile the fact that it works with some people and it doesn't with others?
That's a great question. Things happen to us, and then we interpret them before we know that we interpreted them.
Yeah.
That's why, like you walk into a room, your wife is there, she's reading a book, and you say, hey, you want to go out to dinner tonight? And she goes, And before you can think, you have a feeling.
Yeah.
And you're like, what?
You don't want to have dinner with me?
Stupid mass market paperback, and you don't want to have dinner? Like, and all of a sudden, like there's all of this experience is happening.
Yeah.
I use that illustration to say that like stimulus happens to us and we interpret it faster than we can think.
Yeah.
And because that happens so quickly, oftentimes we assume that our interpretation and what happened are the same thing, the exact same thing. Between the event and the interpretation is this black box of nature and nurture, which, we kind of generally say our story.
Yeah.
That box is rarely ever accessible by ourselves. We have to have somebody who can help ask the right kinds of questions for us to reveal what is the algorithm inside that black box that interprets this event this way. And that's where professional therapy comes in. Oftentimes people think that therapists are there to tell you what to do with your life,
right,
or what to think, or even what to feel. Instead, they are professionals at helping you self-discover what's in between those two things.
Right.
Why can two pastors go through the same thing and one of them flourish and one of them deteriorate? And then why is the one that's flourishing later deteriorate while he's always been flourishing? Like, how do all these complications work? In between the event and the interpretation is this unseen black box.
Yeah.
Therapists are there to help ask the questions to help you find out what that is. And in that sense, it goes hand in hand with prayer, where as those questions are asked and we give answers, kind of like God, like the story about me driving home. Would you feel like a failure? Yes. And that me answering it out loud allowed for the Spirit to say, all right, now I can give you the thing I wanted to tell you.
Right.
Similarly, I've experienced that in therapy myself, where the questions that were asked helped me to be open to the way that the Spirit was trying to reach me that I otherwise just simply wouldn't hear.
Yeah, that's so good. So given if we had like a couple hours, we could talk about all the reasons why pastors should at least make themselves available to some therapy. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we could probably convince most people that there's probably a pretty significant reason for doing that. How does a pastor who doesn't necessarily feel like they've ever had that option, now they see that that's an option, how do they make the first step towards getting help?
That's great. 70% of the efficacy of therapy is the relationship, the therapeutic relationship. Or let me take that back. I don't know if it's 70, it might even be more. But the vast majority, let me put it that way, the vast majority of the efficacy of therapy is the relationship. So what that means is you could have lots of different modalities with different therapists, and they are not as effective as the fact that you trust the person you're going to.
Yeah.
So how do we do anything when it comes to finding someone we trust? If my car breaks down in Longview today, I live in Portland, who am I going to ask about a mechanic?
Right.
You, because you probably have someone that you trust.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go there and say, well, I'm going to give this guy a chance because Jeff trusts him. Similarly.
You know what's interesting? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, of course. No.
It's interesting, Abe. That was one of the things I noticed when I was in ministry. I was pastoring for over 30 years, and rarely would anyone ever talk about how good their therapist was, because they had to admit they were seeing a therapist. And so that kept them from telling me, the person that was trying to help connect people with mental health resources, I didn't know who the good therapists were in town, because the people who had bad therapists would tell me about them, but I would never hear from the people that had good experiences with therapy.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
That is weird. I have thoughts about that. I mean, it's always, whenever we complain, we are safer than when it's not a vulnerable place.
Yeah.
And sometimes saying, I have a great therapist. Every time I talk to this man, I weep. That's a lot harder to say than a bogus therapist that doesn't do anything. He just takes my money. Which one's safer, So it makes sense to me that oftentimes we're getting a bad report.
Well, it made me wonder if I was asking the wrong questions,
It could be.
Was I making it easy for people to confess that they were seeing a therapist so that we could have that conversation?
Yeah.
Because I think that sometimes people felt like I was a spiritual leader who thought they should be 100% reliant on spirituality to solve all their problems, and they didn't want to tell me that they were somehow weak and needed to see a therapist. It was that kind of like, it was hard for people to be honest about that. Yeah. I don't think it's the same anymore. I think things have changed dramatically in the last 20 years, where people who are in therapy are much more willing to at least broach the conversation about what that experience is like for them.
Yeah. And if that's the case, which I'm really hoping so, there are some questions that you could ask. And in order to not get the answer that you were talking about, where it just feels like everyone's complaining about their therapist, one will most likely have to lead with vulnerability.
Yeah.
I'm really looking for therapists where I could be open and it feels safe. Do you know anyone like that? Or, Dan, I hear that sometimes you've seen a therapist. Instead of saying, what was that like? Was that bad? Is it okay? Instead saying, I'm looking for someone I can trust. Did you find that you could trust your therapist? What was that like? What were the moments that felt like you could trust them? The other thing is for pastors, there's a good chance that you probably want to talk to a Christian therapist.
Right.
And that's why, for example, at Charis, we only hire Christian therapists. We have a general statement of faith that they sign because we realize that alone could be kind of the stepping stone into therapy.
That's good.
So there's also a referral program called Renewed Heart. It used to be His Hands.
His Heart.
His Heart. That's right. His Heart. I always say His Hands. It used to be His Heart, but that nonprofit closed down, and it's going to be reborn as Renewed Heart.
Right.
I'm in conversations with people that do that referral program. It's not up and running yet, but it will be, and that's also a great place.
So will you work with them?
Not,
or are you separate from them?
We are separate from them. It's not a subsidiary of Charis.
Right.
But, I mean, we're all on the same team. So Renewed Heart's coming up probably, I would suspect, early to mid 2025. They're in the process of doing all the nonprofit stuff that you got to do to get up and running.
So tell me, you've created some workshops that you offer to churches in particular to help bridge that gap.
Yeah.
What are those like?
Yeah. So there's 3 different workshops. They answer 3 big questions. Number 1 is spiritual growth and mental health. How do they work together? How do they affect each other? The second one is, if you took all of the nefarious parts, everything bad, out of social media. So it's just the social media platform without any of the junk. Would it still have a negative mental health effect on you?
Right.
And the answer is yes. And the reasons are astounding. This came out of a passion project with 2 of our therapists. It's absolutely incredible. And we've given that talk to high schoolers, middle schoolers, adults, and they're all coming up to us afterwards saying, this was way more than we thought it would be. This is impactful, and we feel like we have steps to make a difference.
Very cool.
It's not a turn off your social media, turn it on, limit it to 30 minutes kind of talk. It's let's talk about how social media functions and how it affects us at a really fundamental level. And then the third one is we tell it trauma-informed basics. And it asks the question, what are you supposed to do when someone's hyper aroused and freaking out? And all of us who have been in that position, whether you're a teacher or a pastor or just a parent or just a friend for that matter.
Just a parent with a 14-year-old girl. Sorry, whoops. I just flashed back.
No matter what you are, when someone comes to you in distress, you know that the words you're about to say are going to get stuck in them forever.
Yeah.
And I've found, and our therapists as well have found, that oftentimes when people are talking about church hurt, not all the time, but sometimes, what they're actually saying is, when I was in distress, I got bad advice, or they treated me poorly. They didn't know how to handle me when I was losing it.
Yeah.
And I think all of us can think of moments like that, inside the church, outside the church, in the home.
Last week?
Yeah.
That happens all the time, Abe.
Yes.
That's a normal occurrence in a congregation today.
Absolutely.
For a lot of different reasons.
Absolutely. So we bring in our clinical director or our executive director. We built this curriculum with them. And what we do is we give you the practical steps to actually being able to address that in a way that that ups the chances of that person experiencing church healing instead of church hurt.
That's cool.
And you don't have to have a doctorate in psychology to be able to do these things. They're practical, they're easy, and we spend 2 hours with the church staff. In fact, we taught it to the core staff at Ridgefield Nazarene about a month ago. The youth pastor said, this is amazing. I want all of my volunteers to have it. We're going to go on a winter retreat where we're really going to be interfacing with kids. And I want each one of them to know how to hold that kind of safe space for somebody when they talk about the biggest things in their life. So those are the big three that we're doing right now.
And City Service planning on doing those 3 workshops in Longview in January, May, and September next year. We're putting together the details of that, but I can't wait to make that available to the people in our community, because I think that you've really worked through some really focused areas of bridging that gap that are not just general, but they're really specific to what the church needs right now.
And, honestly, that's all thanks to our therapists. They're seeing people daily, many people every day, and they're seeing these patterns.
Yeah.
Because of HIPAA, we can't tell their stories, but we can abstract it out into these things that we can give back into the community. At Charis, we have basically our 3 C's. We care about our client, which means we have to care about their cash, because cash is stopping some clients from finishing.
Right.
So that's why we have donors there. And then once they finish, they go back into a community. That's our 3rd C. And we realize we can take what we're finding in session and turn it into something that we can empower our church communities and our greater community to be able to support the people who have done the hard work of healing.
So churches can do a couple different things, and you can elaborate on this, Abe, if you want, but they can partner with Charis to provide those services for people who for whatever reason can't continue service because of finances. City Serve has done that. We are part of what we support outside of our own organization is supporting Charis and their ability to do that with people. They can also invite you into the congregation, not necessarily the congregation, but maybe the leadership or even the congregation, and invite you to come and do those workshops.
Absolutely.
And they just need to contact you, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you can find my contact at Charis Counseling. That's just CHARIS counseling.com.
And then also, local pastors and leaders can contact Charis and actually receive therapy themselves, initiate a therapy, their first therapy session with you directly, right?
That's right. And that's where, especially here in, for example, Longview, if you want to have therapy where this is new to you and you don't want to be seen at the therapist's office.
You don't want somebody in your congregation walking into the office when you're there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've got offices in Ridgefield, Vancouver, Camas. We're going to be opening up in Portland soon, probably in 2025. And we also have telehealth options. And these are ways where you can remain anonymous and get the help you need without it becoming a public scene that you might be concerned about.
Yeah. Well, we'll put all that in the show notes. Maybe one more thing that just is on your heart right now that the Lord's been really speaking to you about as far as what you bring into to Charis and what you're doing right now, where your focus is right now that you just like to share with people.
Yeah. The thing that's actually been on my heart has been around certainty. Many of us find serving Jesus a way to kind of reduce the chaos and mess and muddle and miracle that is living life.
Yeah.
And so we say, I've got these principles. It helps me know how to live in this world, and I'm certain of it now. That certainty, when it becomes hyper certainty, breeds a kind of poison into living life. I don't know about you, but I'm still shocked by how Jesus tells parables.
Right.
And the fact that he doesn't explain them, except when he explains them to the disciples. And I try to imagine myself in the place of the 5,000 that are hearing parable after parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. And I ask myself, would I have followed Jesus? Or would he have been too mysterious? Would he have left too much open? And I struggle sometimes to say that I would.
Right.
I might think he was a hack. Like, okay, go talk about seeds somewhere else. Like, if you're not even going to explain it, where's your practical application? Where's your alliteration? Where's your 3 points?
Where's my formula?
We know how sermons go.
Yeah.
And so what I find is that oftentimes as pastors, we get stuck in this demand upon ourselves and in our congregations to be the anchor of certainty, where people can come on the waves and winds of the stormy seas of their life and find an anchor in you, pastor. And that is a dangerous thing. And people...
Well, does it occur to anyone that the whole Christian belief is built on faith? not certainty. I mean, there is a certainty in the person of Jesus, but you still have to have faith in that person in order to get anything to happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And faith is the assurance of things that we don't see, but it requires that we confess we don't see them.
Yeah, that's really good.
And if we're presenting the gospel or the life of faith in a way where it appears as though we see it all clear as day, we're doing faith a disservice.
Yeah.
And we're exchanging faith for certainty, a kind of certainty that will kind of closet faith for something that feels more ordered and sure.
And it makes the gospel a difficult message to embrace.
It does.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we could go on and on. I mean, you and I have become friends really quickly, and part of it is because I value who you are and what God is doing in you. I think you're a gift to Charis, but I also think you're a gift to me and the people around me. So I'm really glad that we got a chance to talk today. I hope I can already think of 100 follow-up questions that we could ask in the next interview. So we'll probably do one soon. And maybe after we've done a couple of workshops in town, you can give me some reflection on what you see in the Longview-Kelso area and what our needs are specifically. But thank you, Abe. Thank you for taking the time to spend with me today and just talk about something that's really important to my heart.
Jeff, this is really meaningful. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And thank you for the kind words.
Yeah.